The message arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning, appearing simultaneously on every digital screen on Earth. The soft blue glow of alien text filled screens from New York to Tokyo, from smartwatches to giant billboards. As translation software processed the message, humanity held its collective breath. Greetings, Species 4781b, designation humans. The Galactic Council acknowledges your achievement of faster-than-light travel. You are hereby invited to present yourselves before the Grand Council within one standard galactic month. In the United Nations emergency session that followed, Ambassador James Miller sat quietly, watching the chaos unfold. At 55 years old, with gray temples and laugh lines around his eyes, he was known for keeping his cool in tough situations. But even he felt his heart race as he read through the attachment that followed the invitation, a 10,000-page document titled Proper Etiquette and Protocols for New Species Presentation. "This can't be serious," he muttered, scrolling through the first chapter. There are 15 different types of bows just for entering the council chamber. The document detailed everything from the correct angle to tilt one's head, 37.2 degrees for species with flexible necks, to the precise number of steps required to approach the council podium, exactly 73, with a pause of 2.7 seconds between each step. In Washington, D.C., the newly formed Human Diplomatic Response Team gathered in a hastily prepared office. Maps of the known galaxy covered the walls, and tablets displayed endless streams of protocol information. Ambassador Miller walked in, his coffee cup already empty despite the early hour. "What's our status?" he asked his assistant, Tom Parker, a young diplomat who hadn't slept in what looked like days. "Bad," Tom replied, running his hands through his disheveled hair. "According to the welcome package, we're supposed to have mastered at least 1,000 greeting ceremonies before our first appearance. Most species take 5 years to prepare for their introduction. We have 1 month," Miller reminded him. "And that's not all," added Dr. Laura West, their xenocultural expert. "Each council member must be greeted in their specific traditional manner. The Thoraxians require a specific ultrasonic hum, and the Crystal Collective expects a precise arrangement of colored lights." Miller picked up a tablet, scanning through more requirements. New species were expected to demonstrate their understanding of galactic history through a series of ritualistic dances. They needed to recite the Council's founding documents in 17 different languages, including 3 that used scent patterns instead of sound. "Has anyone else noticed something strange about these protocols?" Miller asked, his eyes narrowing as he studied the documents more carefully. The room fell quiet as he walked to the whiteboard and started writing. "Look at this pattern. Every single requirement puts new species in a submissive position. The bowing, the waiting periods, the mandatory expressions of inferiority. It's almost like they're designed to keep newcomers in their place," Dr. West said slowly, realization dawning on her face. Miller nodded. "Exactly. This isn't just ceremony, it's politics. They're making sure every new species knows their place at the bottom of the hierarchy." The room buzzed with this new understanding. Humans had spent centuries dreaming of joining a galactic community, but now they were facing what looked more like a galactic high school clique. "So what do we do?" Tom asked, voicing what everyone was thinking. "We can't learn all this in a month, but we can't just ignore it either." Miller stood by the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Somewhere up there, the Council was waiting, expecting Earth to follow the same path every other new species had taken. "Maybe," he said slowly, a slight smile forming on his face, "we don't need to play by their rules at all. Maybe it's time someone showed the galaxy a different way." As night fell over Earth, the Human Diplomatic Response Team began forming a plan that would either earn humanity's place among the stars or become the biggest diplomatic disaster in galactic history. Either way, the Galactic Council was about to meet something they'd never encountered before: humans being unapologetically human. 2 weeks after receiving the invitation, the Human Diplomatic Response Team was in shambles. The large office in Washington, D.C., once neat and organized, now looked like a tornado had hit a library. Papers covered every surface, and the walls were plastered with diagrams showing different alien greeting poses. Ambassador Miller walked through the chaos, stepping over a junior diplomat who had fallen asleep while practicing the traditional greeting dance of the Star Peoples. On the main screen, Tom Parker was attempting to master what the Council called the 17 movements of respectful approach. No, 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 Dr. West shouted at the screen. The third bow needs to be at exactly 42 degrees, not 43. At this rate, we'll cause an interstellar incident. Miller watched as Tom tried again, this time losing his balance and crashing into a desk. Coffee cups went flying, adding new stains to the already messy floor. "That's enough," Miller said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Everyone take a break." The team gathered in their meeting room, looking exhausted. Miller studied their faces. These were Earth's best diplomats, reduced to nervous wrecks by endless alien protocols. "I've been doing some research," Miller said, pulling up files on the main screen. "Look at this. Every species that joined the Council in the last 1,000 years. They're all at the bottom of the power structure." He showed them images of various Council meetings. The newer species sat in the back, spoke last, and had to go through the most complex greeting rituals. But the older species, he continued, switching to different images, they barely follow any protocols at all. The ancient ones just float in whenever they want. The Star Elders don't even attend half the ceremonies. Tom, still rubbing his bruised knee from his failed practice attempt, looked up. "Are you saying the rules are different for different species?" "I'm saying," Miller replied, "that these rules weren't made to show respect. They were made to keep new species busy jumping through hoops while the old powers make all the decisions." Dr. West pulled up her own research on a tablet. "He's right. Look at this. 300 years ago, the Spiral Arm Alliance tried to change the Council's trade policies. They spent so long preparing for the proper ceremonial proposal that by the time they finished, the policy they wanted to change had already been made permanent." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. They weren't just facing complex customs. They were facing a system designed to maintain power through bureaucracy. Miller stood up and walked to the window. Outside, tourists were taking pictures of the new alien language banners that now hung alongside national flags. "I think we've been approaching this all wrong," he said. "We've been trying to learn their dance steps when we should be writing our own song." "What do you mean?" asked Tom, looking confused. Miller turned back to the team, a determined look in his eyes. Earth didn't become a spacefaring civilization by following someone else's rulebook. We got here by being innovative, practical, and sometimes a bit stubborn. He grabbed a marker and started writing on the whiteboard. "Instead of learning their protocols, we're going to show them ours. Simple, direct, and honest. No 4-hour greeting ceremonies, no 17-stage bowing sequences." But the Council. Dr. West started to protest. "The Council invited humans to join them," Miller interrupted. "So they're going to meet real humans, not puppets dancing to their tune." Over the next hour, Miller outlined his plan. It was either brilliant or insane. Possibly both. They would respect the Council, but they would do it the human way. As the team left that evening, there was a new energy in their steps. They were no longer trying to memorize impossible protocols. Instead, they were preparing to show the galaxy something it had never seen before. In his office, Miller looked at a photo of Earth taken from space, a beautiful blue marble floating in the darkness. "Time to show them who we really are," he whispered to himself, knowing that in 2 weeks they would either change galactic history or become a cautionary tale told to future civilizations. Either way, it would be authentically human. The Grand Council chamber was a sight that made even Ambassador Miller pause for a moment. The massive room stretched up for what seemed like miles, its crystal walls shifting with colors that shouldn't exist. 2,000 different species sat in rising tiers, each more alien than the last. Some glowed, others floated, and a few seemed to exist in multiple places at once. "Remember the plan," Miller whispered to his small team as they waited in the preparation chamber. Through the giant doors, they could hear the council's chief herald announcing Earth's scheduled entrance time. According to tradition, new species were required to wait exactly 47 minutes after their announcement before beginning the entry ceremony. The ceremony itself usually took 4 hours, involving complex movements, songs, and ritualistic offerings. Miller checked his watch. 10 seconds had passed. "Ready?" he asked his team. They nodded, though Tom looked slightly green. Miller straightened his simple black suit, adjusted his tie, and did something no species had done in 10,000 years of council history. He opened the doors early and walked right in. The reaction was immediate and spectacular, a floating crystal being chimed an alarm so loudly it cracked. 3 different anti-gravity fields failed, dropping their occupants several feet as their operators gasped in shock. The chief herald, midway through his 4th repetition of Earth's announcement, inhaled his ceremonial drink and began coughing rainbow-colored bubbles. "Hello, everyone," Miller said clearly into the stunned silence. "I'm Ambassador James Miller from Earth. Thank you for inviting us." The High Speaker, a tall being made of shifting silver mist, actually condensed partly into liquid from shock. When they reformed, their voice boomed through the chamber. This is unprecedented. The entry ceremony has not yet begun. You must wait for the proper time." Miller smiled politely. "On Earth, when someone invites us to a meeting, we consider it polite to arrive promptly and introduce ourselves clearly. So that's what we're doing." Several of the elder species representatives began changing colors rapidly, apparently their version of angry sputtering. One of them, a being that looked like a collection of geometric shapes, spoke in a voice like clicking crystals. "You cannot simply walk in. There are protocols, traditions, the 17 steps of approach, the song of supplication, the dance of New World humility." Miller walked forward, not in the traditional 73 steps with 2.7-second pauses, but in a normal, confident stride. More gasps echoed through the chamber. "With all respect," he said, reaching the central platform, "we believe the best way to show respect is to be honest and direct. In the time it would take us to perform your traditional ceremony, we could have already begun productive discussions about how Earth can contribute to the galactic community." The chamber erupted in chaos. Elder species representatives were floating, glowing, and vibrating in various states of outrage. But Miller noticed something interesting. Many of the younger species were watching with what seemed like fascination. A few were even trying to hide what looked like approval. The High Speaker's misty form swirled in agitation. "This is outrageous. In all the history of the Council." "History is important," Miller interrupted smoothly, causing several more anti-gravity failures among the shocked listeners. "But so is progress. Earth respects the Council's traditions, but we also believe in efficiency and authenticity. We're here as equals, ready to share and learn." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small item that made the entire Council lean forward in curiosity. "On Earth, we have a simple greeting that communicates respect, trust, and equality all at once," Miller said. He held up his hand. "It's called a handshake. Would anyone like to learn it?" The chamber fell into absolute silence. 10,000 years of tradition hung in the balance. Then, from one of the middle tiers, a younger species representative floated down. "I would," they said, extending what looked like a tentacle. Miller smiled and shook it gently. And just like that, whether the Council liked it or not, a new era of galactic diplomacy had begun. After the historic handshake, the Grand Council chamber remained in an uproar. The elder species were glowing in various shades of what Miller assumed was disapproval, while the younger species whispered among themselves. The High Speaker's misty form had finally stopped dripping, but they still quivered with barely contained emotion. "You must explain yourself, Ambassador Miller," the High Speaker demanded. Such Such casual behavior has never been seen in these chambers. Miller stood calmly at the center platform, his team behind him. He noticed several efficiency experts from the Crystal Collective taking notes furiously. Interesting. I'll be happy to explain, Miller said. But first, a question. How long does it take to make a decision in the council? The High Speaker's misty form swirled. We follow the proper procedures. Each matter is given its due time and ceremony. Which is how long exactly? A younger species representative spoke up. The last trade agreement took 6 months just to get on the agenda. Then 2 more months for the ceremony of proposal submission. Miller nodded. And how many species suffered while waiting for these ceremonies? The chamber grew quiet. He had hit a nerve. Let me demonstrate something, Miller said. He turned to Tom. Tom, I need the reports from Earth. Tom stepped forward, not with the traditional 40-step approach, but simply walking normally, and handed Miller a tablet. Several elder species visibly flinched at this casual movement. Here's a comparison, Miller continued. Using traditional council protocols, it takes approximately 7 hours to formally request emergency aid. On Earth, it takes about 7 seconds. He held up his communication device. Watch this. He pressed a button. This is Ambassador Miller. We need medical supplies in Section C. Within moments, a human medical team entered the chamber, again breaking all entrance protocols, with supplies. Done, Miller said simply. No ceremonies, no rituals, just help when it's needed. The chamber buzzed with mixed reactions. The elder species were radiating waves of what seemed like horror, but many younger representatives were nodding thoughtfully. A being made of floating lights spoke up. But the traditions, they show respect. Do they? Miller asked gently. Or do they just waste time? He walked to the center of the platform. On Earth, we show respect through actions, not ceremonies. When we help quickly, that's respect. When we speak honestly, that's respect. When we treat others as equals, he gestured to the handshake from earlier, that's respect. The High Speaker's form stabilized slightly. You suggest we abandon 10,000 years of tradition. No, Miller replied. I suggest we keep what works and improve what doesn't. Look around this chamber. How many species here actually enjoy spending 4 hours bowing instead of solving problems? A murmur ran through the younger species. Several representatives were looking at each other, then at their elder species representatives, then back at Miller. Perhaps, a voice came from the efficiency expert section, we could examine the time-saving potential of these human methods. Miller smiled. The Crystal Collective's efficiency experts were highly respected, even by the elder species. Their interest was a small victory. I propose a test, Miller said. Let any species who wishes to try our methods do so. Keep your beautiful traditions for ceremonial occasions, but for regular business, let's try something simpler. A bold representative from a younger species stood up. The humans make sense. Last cycle, my world faced a crisis, but by the time we completed the ritual of urgent application, the problem had grown twice as bad. More voices joined in agreement. The chamber was dividing. Tradition versus practicality, old versus new. The High Speaker raised their misty appendages for silence. This is unprecedented. We must take time to think about it. Miller suggested with a small smile. How about we decide now? Simple yes or no. Show of hands, or tentacles, or light patterns, or whatever you use. And for the first time in the Council's history, a vote was taken without a single ceremony. The result surprised everyone. Except, perhaps, Ambassador Miller. 1 week after the historic vote, the Grand Council chamber looked very different. Gone were the rigid seating arrangements that had kept species separated by age of membership. Now representatives sat where they pleased, leading to some interesting conversations. Ambassador Miller watched from his new office in the council tower as a group of younger species practiced human handshakes with each other. Some had too many limbs for a traditional shake, but they were adapting the gesture to fit their bodies. Tentacles wrapped gently, light patterns flickered in greeting, and crystalline beings chimed soft notes while touching edges. "You've caused quite a stir, Ambassador," said first speaker Reed, a being made of swirling blue energy who had become one of Earth's strongest allies. "Half the council is thrilled, and the other half is threatening to never attend another session." Miller sipped his coffee, a drink that had become surprisingly popular among species that could consume liquids. "How are the elder species taking it?" "The ancient ones haven't stopped glowing red since yesterday." Reed's energy form flickered with amusement, especially after they saw the new meeting schedule. The schedule was another human innovation. Instead of waiting months for ceremonial permissions to speak, species could now request immediate meetings for urgent matters. Emergency sessions that once took weeks to organize could now be called in minutes. Tom burst into the office, still causing nearby traditional species to flinch at the casual entrance. "Ambassador, we have a situation. The Conservative Coalition is organizing a protest." Miller raised an eyebrow. "What kind of protest?" "They're performing all 7,000 steps of formal objection in the main hallway." "How long will that take?" Reed asked. "At traditional speed." "About 3 weeks," Tom replied. Miller nodded calmly. "Let them protest." "Meanwhile, how many species have signed up for the new emergency response system?" Tom checked his tablet. "Over 40, including 3 from the Middle Rim who never spoke up before because the traditional request procedure took longer than their planet's year." The changes were spreading faster than anyone had expected. Several younger species had already started holding what they called Earth-style meetings. Short, direct discussions without ceremonial delays. The Council's efficiency experts had calculated that these meetings solved problems 82% faster than traditional methods. But not everyone was happy. The elder species had formed the Conservative Coalition, demanding a return to the old ways. They claimed that tradition was being destroyed, that the dignity of the Council was under attack. "Another thing," Tom added, "the Crystal Collective's analysis team wants to meet with you. They've been studying Earth's historical records." Miller's eyes narrowed. "What did they find?" "They say humanity's direct approach isn't just about efficiency. They think it's how Earth survived so many challenges. When we faced problems, we didn't wait for ceremonies, we acted." Reed's energy form pulsed thoughtfully. "They're right. My species spent 6 months performing the ritual of climate concern while our atmosphere degraded. If we had acted immediately." The door chimed, and Dr. West entered with more news. "The Education Committee has approved Earth's proposal. Starting next cycle, all new species will be offered a choice: traditional protocol training or accelerated Earth-style integration." Miller stood and walked to the window. The massive space station that housed the Council stretched out below, its crystalline towers reflecting the light of countless stars. In one section, he could see the Conservative Coalition, still slowly performing their protest steps. In another, a group of younger species was having a quick standing meeting, solving in minutes what would have once taken months. "Change isn't easy," Miller said, watching the contrast. "But sometimes it's necessary." A soft alarm sounded. The new Earth-style alert system. Somewhere in the galaxy, a species needed help. Under the old system, their request would have taken days to process. Miller touched the communication panel. "This is Ambassador Miller. What's the situation?" And as the Council adapted to this new way of doing things, even some of the elder species had to admit, when help arrived in minutes instead of months, perhaps some traditions were worth reconsidering. The galaxy was changing, one handshake at a time. The emergency alert sounded through the Council station at what humans would call 3 a.m. Earth time. Ambassador Miller, who had been reviewing reports in his office, looked up as the message flashed across his screen. A Class 1 disaster was unfolding in the Spiral Arm sector. The Conservative Coalition, led by the elder species, saw their chance. They had been waiting for a major crisis to prove that human methods would fail. "This situation must be handled according to proper tradition," announced High Elder Luminox, their crystalline form glowing bright red. "We must first perform the emergency recognition ceremony," followed by the... Miller was already moving. He pressed the emergency communication button, breaking all protocols by interrupting an elder's speech. "This is Ambassador Miller. All emergency response teams report status." Screens lit up around the chamber as various species responded immediately. No ceremonies, no protocols, just rapid information exchange. The situation became clear. A solar flare had destabilized the atmosphere of a populated planet. They had hours, not weeks, to act. "This is exactly why we need proper procedures," Luminox protested, their crystal segments vibrating with anger. "You cannot simply..." "There are 8 billion people on that planet," Miller cut in, his voice firm. "The ceremonial response would take 6 days. They have less than 10 hours. The chamber divided quickly. The Conservative Coalition began the first movements of emergency protocol, while Miller and his allies started organizing immediate action. "Transport ships ready," reported First Speaker Reed, their energy form pulsing with urgency. "Medical teams standing by," came another response. "Atmospheric stabilizers charging," added a third. The Conservative Coalition watched in horror as Miller coordinated the response with simple, clear commands. No ceremonial language, no ritual pauses, no traditional formations, just quick, efficient action. "This is an outrage," Luminox declared. "You haven't even performed the ritual of permission to enter another species' space." Miller looked directly at the planet's representative. "Do we have permission to enter your space and provide aid?" "Yes," they shouted. "Permission granted." "Moving in," Miller confirmed, and the rescue ships launched. What happened next would be recorded in Council history. The human-led response team reached the planet in 2 hours. The atmospheric stabilizers were deployed in another hour. Medical teams began treating affected populations immediately. The Conservative Coalition was still in the middle of their emergency recognition ceremony when the first report came back. The crisis had been contained. The planet's population was safe. Miller stood before the council, his voice tired but firm. "This is why we've been pushing for change. Today, we saved 8 billion lives because we acted instead of performing ceremonies." The chamber was silent. Even the most traditional species couldn't argue with the results. But the traditions," Luminox started, "are important," Miller finished. "They're beautiful, meaningful, and have their place, but not when lives are at stake. Not when immediate action can prevent suffering." First Speaker Reed floated forward. "The human way saved my cousin's colony last week. A medical emergency that would have taken a month to address through traditional channels was solved in 3 hours. More species began sharing similar stories. Quick responses that saved lives. Problems solved in days instead of months. Real results that no amount of tradition could argue against." The Conservative Coalition's protest began to falter. Some of their members looked thoughtful, their rigid positions softening in the face of undeniable evidence. "Perhaps," said a previously traditional member, their crystalline form shifting to a softer blue, "we could consider a balanced approach. Keep our ceremonies for diplomatic and cultural occasions, but adopt these efficient methods for emergencies." Miller smiled. This was the breakthrough they'd been waiting for. "That's exactly what we've been suggesting," he said. "We don't want to destroy tradition. We want to add something new, something that works alongside the old ways." As the council members discussed this compromise, emergency teams were returning from their successful mission. They had proved, beyond any doubt, that sometimes the best tradition is knowing when to break from tradition. The galaxy was learning that there was room for both ceremony and efficiency, for both ancient wisdom and new ideas. And somewhere on a distant planet, 8 billion beings were alive because of it. 3 months after the Great Rescue, the Grand Council chamber had transformed. Gone were the rigid separations between old and new species. The room now featured a mixture of traditional ceremonial spaces and what had become known as Earth-style meeting areas. Ambassador Miller stood at the center platform, watching as representatives from across the galaxy filed in for the historic session. Some followed the traditional entrance ceremonies, their movements graceful and formal. Others simply walked in with quick greetings and friendly waves. Nobody seemed bothered by either choice anymore. "Ready for the big moment?" Tom asked, standing beside him. His assistant had grown more confident over the months, no longer jumping at every break from tradition. "As ready as we'll ever be," Miller replied, straightening his tie. The High Speaker, their misty form now stable and calm, called the session to order. "Today marks a historic moment in Council history. For the first time, we will officially adopt a dual system of protocol." The new system was simple. For ceremonial and cultural events, traditional protocols would be maintained in all their complex beauty. For everyday business, emergencies, and general communication, the more direct Earth-style approach would be used. High Elder Luminox, who had once been their strongest opponent, floated forward. Their crystalline form now shone with a peaceful blue light. "As head of the Traditional Practices Committee, I never thought I would say this, but the humans were right." A murmur ran through the chamber as Luminox continued. "We have found that preserving our ceremonies while embracing efficiency has made us stronger. Last week, we resolved a trade dispute in one day using Earth-style meetings, then celebrated the agreement with a beautiful traditional ceremony." First speaker reads energy form, pulsed with enthusiasm. "In the past 3 months, emergency response times have improved by 900%. We've solved more problems in a quarter cycle than we used to handle in a full rotation." Miller smiled as various species shared their experiences. A young civilization described how they'd received immediate help during a natural disaster. And elder species admitted that their cultural ceremonies felt more special now that they weren't used for everyday matters. The High Speaker raised their misty appendages. And now, the final vote on the new protocol system. What happened next would be talked about for generations. Instead of the traditional voting ceremony that would have taken days, the High Speaker did something unprecedented. "All in favor, raise your appendages, or tentacles, or light patterns, or whatever you use." The chamber erupted in a show of support that transcended species and traditions. Even the most conservative members voted in favor. "Motion passed," the High Speaker announced, then added with what seemed like a misty smile, "efficiently." The chamber filled with laughter. Another new addition to council procedures that had become common since Earth joined. Miller stepped forward one last time. "If I may suggest one final addition to our new system." The High Speaker nodded. Miller reached into his pocket and pulled out something that made the original council members chuckle: a fist. "On Earth, we have something called a fist bump. It's like a handshake, but quicker. Would anyone like to learn it?" To everyone's amusement, the High Speaker floated down and formed their misty appendage into a fist-like shape. As Miller demonstrated the fist bump to the leader of the Galactic Council, he thought about how far they'd come. They hadn't destroyed tradition. They'd added to it. The galaxy was now a place where ancient ceremonies could coexist with simple nods, where formal protocols harmonized with quick greetings. "So," the High Speaker said after successfully completing their first fist bump, "what other Earth customs should we know about?" Miller grinned. "Well, there's this thing called a high five." As laughter filled the chamber, Miller knew that humanity had done more than just join the galactic community. They had helped it grow, adapt, and become better while respecting its past. And somewhere in the vast archives of the Council, next to the ancient scrolls of traditional protocols, a new document was added: the Human Guide to Efficient Greetings, including handshakes, fist bumps, and other cool stuff. The galaxy would never be the same. And that was a good thing.